Welcome everyone to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the show where I rank all of the dungeons in the Zelda series. And joined as always for this season, I'm here with my pal Corey Richmond. How's it going, Corey?
It's going good. Hello.
Last episode, although we recovered Din's Pearl from Dragon Roost Island, the King of Red Lions is concerned at the knowledge of Ganondorf's presence on the island, and he compels us to move quickly to our next destination in the south. And we can do that now, but we can also not if we want. This is where we get our next evolution of the sailing, where we can change the course of the wind using the Wind Waker. You know, it lets us go now in whatever direction, sort of. We also now get access to the ship's ability to use the grappling hook, which lets us grab treasures from below the water. You see glowing spots where you can search, but also uncovering locations with the treasure charts that we've collected will reveal even nicer treasure spots.
I never really was super into the charts themselves. I was never super excited when I got a chart and I was like, oh, I need to go find this one. It's more like when a little glowing spot pops up, I'm like, ooh, let me try and get it. And I think it's fun that it kind of disappears as you get closer, so it's a little bit of like a guesstimation of like, am I close or not? You have the audio cue of the glowing humming sound effect. It's pretty satisfying.
Yeah, I don't know why it's so satisfying to line it up right. I feel like I got really good at it where I can do it while coming in at it really fast, you know, and just stopping at the right spot and getting it. You know, I don't go crazy with the treasure charts, but I like, you know, checking off all the little pieces and stuff. So that's, you know, it's a fun mechanic. When I play now, I don't even really go for the regular spots, you know. I'll get the treasure chart spots if I see them, but, you know, it's a lot of, here's some rupees or whatever. It's not that exciting. The treasure chart ones, though, they will become more useful later, as we'll discuss in a different episode. Another thing that's added into the mix with the sailing that aids us is the fishmen. Kind of these little stinkers that are all over the world. They got a little tood, and they have some sort of debt, I guess, that they owe to the King of Red Lions. You know, if we give them a little bit of bait, they'll come to our aid and fill out our sea chart and give us a little tidbit of a hint or, you know, some lore or something like that pertaining to usually that quadrant of the sea.
Sometimes it can give you hints of where valuable items are, or hints of, you know, foreshadowing. Like even on the way towards Forest Haven, which we're gonna get to in a little bit, there's a fishman that's like, if you want the ability to freeze fire or whatever, you gotta check out the island that's 2 squares north and 5 squares west of here to get a really cool thing. And it's like, I think that's a really, really cool way to flesh out the world, and it's a really fun kind of collector's thing. In addition to the little hints from the fishmen, you get the nice little illustration square on your map, and you get a nice little another piece of the grid filled out.
I always find that really satisfying, filling out the map. Well, it's not the first incorporation of the map, I guess. You kind of had, you know, maps of the overworld you would get. I think of like buying them from Tingle and stuff. It's similar to that sort of thing in like Link's Awakening or whatever, of like revealing the squares, and then it gets more as the series goes on. We'll see with like Breath of the Wild, of like uncovering the map kind of becoming a mechanic is pretty fun.
They introduced it really well. That's something I kind of wanted to touch on really quick, is that the first interaction with one is mandatory, and it's like a nice little way of teaching you, okay, this is what I can do with this bait that I've bought, if you've bought bait from Beetle before. And then as you continue going south, if you're headed straight towards Forest Haven, you'll encounter one of the fishmen who says something along the lines of, in these waters you'll find a valuable item in a submarine that you can use to hold things. And then as you go farther down, you can see on Bomb Island there's a guy that's looking with his telescope at the submarine off in the distance, and he says something, imagine an item that could hold things such that way. And if you go into that submarine, it's a fun little just fighting a bunch of enemies, and you get your first bottle. And I just think that whole sequence down that southern line, that's a really fun kind of weaved in, almost tutorializing type thing of kind of how this information can pay off in the short term or long term.
In this portion, I would say there's one more key component to the sailing. It's only in the HD remake, but of course, if we don't listen to the King of Red Lions and head south, we can travel to Windfall Island and get that Swift Sail, which you can win at the town's auction house. This item, obviously, it changes the direction that the wind is blowing as you sail, so you no longer need to stop and play the song to do so. So you can kind of, if you want, almost instantly negate that.
The way that you get it with the auction house, sometimes it can be a pain waiting for it to pop up because it's RNG. I think that depends how many auctions you have to go through before it actually pops up. I do kind of like that it's almost a little bit hidden. Sailing is a big complaint that a lot of people have about Wind Waker, and the Swift Sail just makes it so much more fun, so much more streamlined, so much more accessible.
There's still some use to changing the winds with certain puzzles and stuff like that, and I do like those sort of puzzles, but I think, yeah, it makes the sailing go a little bit smoother. I do like it. I think, yeah, the way you get it from the auction house, not ideal, especially because it's random, you know? Maybe if you could go there and, like, pick, you know? That would be fine.
I like the auctions themselves. I think that's a fun little mini game.
It's like weird because it's implemented into the game, but you might not know it exists. You know, for like you could probably just never know about it. And then also like it's like weird because if you don't get it like here, we'll talk about it later maybe, but you kind of have to wait for a long time then. But here it's kind of out of the way, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? He's like he's urging you like go south, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna go to Windfall. That's where I think the expected gripe that I'm going to have, that everyone will see coming, which is here, so we might as well talk about it. But you can be like, no man, I'm gonna go wherever I want, which is okay. And if you go to certain squares on the map, he's like, no, we gotta get going. Come on, we're in a rush. And I think that's sort of fine, you know, if the game still wants to do that. You know, it's an artificial barrier that's a little bit more egregious, that we have the ability to change the wind directions. But what really bothers me here is that, you know, you can have that freedom to go west, which is strange, but what's more strange about it is that, okay, now I'm ready to head towards the destination he's telling me to go. You cannot enter the squares like southeast. And he's like, no, we have to go the direction of the next dungeon. And it's like, I am, you're not letting me. And you have to sail all the way back to a bunch of squares you've already seen, already uncovered, then turn, like, it's like a 90-degree angle. It feels so unnatural. I get it if you still are trying to limit the game a little bit. Either don't let me go west at this point, or let me like make a triangle radius that I can go in, you know? While the stuff you said earlier about how like, oh, this whole path is like, oh, it's like neat how they like tutorialize it, but it's like only if you take that path will you experience it. But then it's like, yeah, of course you'll experience it because they force you to go down that specific path. I've kind of been fine with everything else leading up to this point. Like, okay, the wind can only blow you this way. You know, that sort of thing of kind of like how you're sort of on rails a little bit through the world at this point. But this is where it's kind of pushing it for me, or it's like it's more than a little egregious. It's a little frustrating.
I'm kind of on the same page as you. I didn't actually even remember it being this bad. That doesn't make me mad or anything. It's more just kind of a bummer. I was like, dang, like I just went and got the Swift Sail. I'm in the mood for exploring, but no, you kind of can't. You kind of have to just get pipelined down this hallway, which kind of a shame. I'm willing to forgive the game because, as we'll see within the next episode or two, that's pretty much going to get lifted almost immediately, but this definitely is worse than I remember, to your credit. It's kind of punishing for someone who wants to explore right away, and we're kind of spoiled now with games like Breath of the Wild, where it opens up right away. You know, coming back to a game like this, after playing a game like that, I can see why someone might be like, oh, that's kind of lame. I wish I could just go even one square east. If you could travel southeast towards the dungeon, I had that exact same thought.
The King of Red Lions could say, like, we should head directly south, although if you need to get something from Windfall Island, that would be a good idea or something. It would feel a bit more natural if you then had it as a triangle of like, yeah, kind of this is your range. Like, if you went outside the other places, he'd be like, hold on, I think, you know, we really should get down there, you know. You did a good job though talking up kind of that portion. I pretty much agree with everything you said about how they set up like getting the bottle. That's a fun moment, and you know, you're starting to see a few more things you can do and some things you can't yet do, and some of the teases. I like all that stuff.
I also like that you get the fire ring isle. I like that you get the little tease for that, and that's also a pretty visually stunning thing to see, just like a volcano shooting lava straight out of the sea. That's kind of crazy.
That's always a great feeling of like seeing like the silhouette of an island, being like, what's over there? And then it's like, oh, it's like a fire island. That's a volcano. That's cool.
Besides getting the swift sail, you can go back and spend a good amount of time doing some more stuff in Windfall. I took a picture of the full moon and I showed it to that kid, and now that you can control the wind, you can get the windmill actually running, and you can visit the top, and you can land on the roof, and you can sneak in on Lenzo and that lady and take a picture of them, and you can do another little side quest with that. And now that you have the Wind Waker, you can also get the Sun Song.
The Song of Passing, is it
Song
called?
of Passing, yeah. I just think it's fun that even if you just go back right after you've already been there, there's additional stuff that you can do just since your last visit. And I think that's a lot of fun. It's a great way to flesh out that little location.
We eventually get to the island that the king was pushing us towards, though, which is Forest Haven. And from the outside, it looks like this giant tree sitting atop the ocean. It's got kind of a cool look. But on the inside, you kind of have this charming little forest grotto. It's got a nice chill tune, good vibes, we're hanging out. And we meet the guardian that the King of Red Lions brought us here to speak with, who is the Great Deku Tree, who we know. He's our old pal. And as the king was worried, Ganondorf has had some influence in this region already. We have to even rescue the Great Deku Tree from these like chews that are like hanging out on his face.
Yeah.
And
it's a funny scene. It looks like there's zits popping out of his face, and then it does like a crazy zoom thing.
And he's like, oh.
Yeah.
He also is concerned about Ganon's resurgence here, and we've proven ourselves as not the enemy. He's like, all right, Koroks, get out here. And then all these little tree people who live in the woods all fly down. It's a magical moment. Of course, we have sort of the lore that I think is understood, that the Koroks used to be the Kokiri.
The Koroks are my favorite race in all of Zelda, I think. They're so cute. They're so lovable. I love the little sound effects they make. I love the forest aesthetic. It's like a really nice, tranquil, like a haven. It feels like literally what it's defined as, a forest haven. Something that I do think is really cool is, especially for someone who has played Ocarina of Time, this more so than I think anything so far in the game, besides maybe the legendary hero introduction story, this really nails home kind of the feel that this is a distant sequel to Ocarina of Time. The Deku Tree first talks to you in Hylian, and then he says a little blurb afterwards of like, oh, I'm sorry, I saw your outfit and a tongue of days gone by passed my lips subconsciously. And of course that's supposed to be a reference to Link from Ocarina of Time. And then on top of that, this whole location is supposed to be literally directly a reference to Kokiri Forest. And even if you talk to some of the Koroks, some of them say a few little things of like, oh yeah, you can even find our old houses in the Forbidden Woods. They just look like hollowed out stumps. That's where we used to live before, when we lived in the forest. It's a really good job of not nailing it over the head of like, this is a sequel to Ocarina of Time, but just really subtly weaving in these powerful references that I think are pretty meaningful, lore-wise at least.
He is like, before I give you this pearl, because he's down with that, he's like, oh, we gotta do this Korok ritual, because otherwise something bad will happen to them. We don't, they talk, you find out later, but they're like, yeah, we gotta do this now. We gotta have this party. Sadly, though, one of the Koroks, Makar, has fallen into the Forbidden Woods that sits next to the Forest Haven. We don't know him yet, but you want to be concerned about this guy.
Oh, yeah.
This concerns the Great Deku Tree, and he asks us, to go help rescue Makar. To help us reach the woods, he offers us a Deku Leaf. But it takes a little bit to get to it. We can talk about the gameplay of this area, because I feel like even leading up to this area, there's a little bit of tutorial with the gameplay, because there's sort of an ascent that leads up to the inner part of the stump. You know, you fight some Deku Babas, and they grow out of these little buds in the ground, and they leave behind Deku sticks. So this is all like items that we're going to recognize and use later.
And you get some use of the grappling hook on your way up too.
And it feels like it's going over rushing water, so it's like, it kind of feels like, even though it's kind of the same sort of deal as what we've been doing before, it feels like unique and fun, I think. It just feels fun, you know, thrilling, jumping over the rapids. We have to use those same buds that the Deku Babas pop out of. We sort of jump from one, and they shoot us up to a higher level, and you can kind of direct it and aim it. I think it's pretty fun. Once we get the Deku Leaf, you sort of combine those with that and the grappling hook of like swinging into a bud or popping out of a bud and floating with the Deku Leaf. Just a lot of really fun sort of gameplay elements here.
The fact that this is just like a civilization location, but it's showing off one of the game's strengths, which is utilizing a 3D space. The verticality of this space is so perfectly used with the bouncing in and out of the Baba buds. And not only that, but it's a perfect little subconscious tutorial training for what you're going to be doing in the upcoming dungeon as well. This is almost pretty comparable to the buds that you shoot out of as Deku Link in Majora's Mask. But I just think the way that they're placed and the way that you can control yourself and rotate, it just feels like a perfect evolution of utilizing a 3D space and feeling like you can really go anywhere as long as you are capable of doing that. And then to top that off, we get one of the best items in the whole game, the Deku Leaf, which just, I think, blows the lid off of the whole thing, because it's like a proto glider. Like now, as long as you have enough magic, you can float anywhere you want.
It helps with making that idea that you talked about of like an evolution of the Deku Mask Leaf, because that's the second part of it, is popping out of the bud and floating. Basically, it's a similar functionality, almost the same, but it gives you different options on how you want to negotiate it, like before or after, and I think that's pretty fun. We get a final test of it too before we go to the dungeon, like kind of this big set piece, and it brings in the wind mechanics, which is pretty cool. And so we have to kind of get over this large gap between the Forest Haven and the Forbidden Woods, and we gotta make sure the wind is sort of pointing in the right direction to get there, but you can't just get it on one go, so you have to sort of stop at this little island that's between the two. You gotta change the wind at that point, obviously, and then use this sort of whirlwind gust to lift us higher and make our way over to the next dungeon.
It feeds into this theme that I keep hitting on, is that it now, not only is it this inside area where they have purposely placed these Boko buds so that you can pop up in a train and you can float around this vertical room, that's all well and good. But now you go outside into the wide open world, and you can float wherever you want in this huge open space, and it's like really cool to me.
We had it with Medley, but now here we're doing it ourselves, where like the wind out here matters.
And there's one more little way that you can use the wind and the Deku Leaf in this area and get access to the Nintendo gallery. You can use some of these pictographs you've been taking to start collecting one of the main collectibles of this game, which is the figurines.
That is like cool. That's like a thing that opens up here, and now, you know, you can be like, oh, this is where I come to take my pictures. So yeah, we are now entering the Forbidden Woods, which we'll be talking about next time. We're gonna see how some of these new mechanics just introduced play out. So with that, we will see everybody in the next episode.